Hi, my name is Jordan LaMothe. I'm here at my studio in Hebron, New York, and I'm going to be demonstrating making a chef knife. So this is going to be a multi-part series, and we're going to start, like all my knives start, in the forge. So the stock I'm starting with is 1 1/4 inches wide by 1/4 inch thick, and 5 inches long for a 7-inch chef knife, or 5 1/2 for an 8-inch chef knife. I'm going to be making a 7-inch chef knife today. The first thing we need to figure out is what part of this stock is going to be the tang and which side is going to be the blade. And I found that shouldering it at about 1 1/4 from one end will give you enough room to make a tang. So because this is 1 1/4 wide, I can use that as my measurement. And I'm going to mark that out on my anvil so that I can shoulder it. I know where to put it. And then I can also mark it on the bar itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this down, and I'm going to make sure that it's about 1 inch wide once I shoulder it down. All right, so I'll line up with my mark, give it a good smack. Check and make sure that the bar is not moving forward and back when you make that first. I'm going to go to a part of my anvil with more rounded corner. So now I'm going to check how wide this is. I want it to be 1 inch. Well, it's about 7/8. That's okay too. But I have some extra thickness in here that I'll push back down and it'll get wider. Alright. Just trying to get back to the 1/4 inch thickness that we had to begin with. Lighter blows to clean things up. Corner, and this will define the heel of the knife. This will become the tang, this will become the blade. Now that I have this isolated, I'm ready to turn around and draw a point. So that means that I need to put the heat in this area. So I'm going to start at a 45-degree angle. Knock that corner in all the steel. Mushrooms up, so I'm going to smack that back down. Alright, so that pushing the corner in is going to help to prevent any kind of fish mouthing or bending that happens at the tip of the bar. I don't have to do that on the bottom corner because we want that corner to be the tip of the knife. Just going to push the rest of this corner in. On my next heat, I'm going to come and I'm going to use the horn of the anvil and hit on top here to really quickly draw that point down. With a chef knife, you want to be careful not to make the point too long and skinny because you do want the blade to be fairly wide. So it's best to start with an angle like 45 degrees, and then you can work it back to meet the curvature that you want. But if it gets too drawn out, then you won't be able to push it back. The horn of the anvil. thicker, and it's smaller. It will get bigger in almost every dimension. So now I want to crisp up this heel because it still droops down a little bit, and we want to put the mass where it needs to be before we start thinning it out and drawing the bevels. Perpendicular to its length. So when I line up the peen with the knife, it's going to spread the material wider, which is what we want for a chef knife. Notice I did all this heat on one side, so I'm going to make sure the next heat I flip it over and do it on the other side. That helps it get forged evenly side to side, but it doesn't waste time flipping the steel during the hammering. That's is a little bit wonky, but I mostly have the mass where it needs to be. Notice that it's quite a bit thinner than the initial bar. This is now right around 3/16 of an inch, so I've taken it down by a 1/16 of an inch, and it's got bigger in all the dimensions. 3/16 is kind of a good place to shoot for the thickness of the ricasso. It's going to want to get quite a bit thinner down the blade, because this is a chef knife that's going through, veggies, and you want it to have as little resistance as possible. But now that everything is just about that dimension, I'm ready to start drawing the bevels. So now we're going to leave our rectangular cross section and start to make the edges thinner. So because I still want a wider blade than this preform, I'm going to use the peen to draw the heel. Now this region of the blade here wants to stay thick, and all of this area here wants to be thinner. So I'm gonna make sure that I don't hit any of this white area with my peen. So I'm going to concentrate my peen blows on the edge side to draw that wider. Now toward the tip, I might use more of the flat so that it spreads it in both directions. And I'm going to do that again. One heat on one side, one heat on the other side. lot of steel in the grinding, so I want to make it pointy again before I thin it out too much more. How this blade is almost exactly the same shape as our preform. It's just gotten bigger. You can see my edge length is just a hair under 7 inches, and it's about to get there once I thin out the edge a little bit more. When I thin out the edge, it's going to push that tip up and give us our nice, more or less symmetrical chef blade shape. fracasso area. This can get ground to however you want to meet the handle, but the rest of this needs to be tapered out into a tang. I'll probably forge in little shoulders here as well, but I'm going to start by moving all that mass out, just using the base of my hammer and drawing it out into a point. proper knife. But before it can be hardened, we need to prepare the grain for the hardening process. So the first step in preparing the steel for the hardening process is normalizing. So we want to heat this whole knife up to a bright orange temperature, which will relax all the tension in the steel. So I have it going in tank first right now, because that's the thicker part of the blade. It'll heat up a little bit more slowly. But I want to get the whole blade up to an orange heat and let it air cool. We'll just let it air cool until it's black. And as it's cooling, you see the color grow dimmer. It's hard to tell the colors on the camera, but you see a color grow dimmer, and then you'll see an extra band of red come after this band of black. Now, that's a helpful guide to temperature. Here you can see the red starting to come in, because we want to get hotter than that band of black when we put it back in the forge for hardening. And we're actually going to do that lower temperature a few times to refine the grain. So we'll just bring it up to that dull red, and then let it air cool, and then bring it up to the dull red, and then let it air cool. And I do that 3 times typically before bringing up to that same dull red and quenching in oil in order to harden the blade. Alright, so this blade is black. It's now ready to go back into the forge for a lower temperature thermal cycle. Of the blade heat up quickly, so it's important not to let them get too hot. cool off again. Again, I'll do this 3 times and then go in for the quench. So I've thermal cycled the blade 3 times, and now I have my quench oil close at hand, and I'm getting an even red heat over the entire blade. I have my welding gloves on so that I can straighten the blade as soon as it comes out of the quench. Until it stops sizzling. Wipe off the oil before grabbing it with your gloves, otherwise the hot oil will soak right into your gloves and burn you. Before this blade reaches about 300 degrees, it's still malleable, so you can straighten it by hand, which is almost always necessary with a chef knife because it's so thin. So this one took a little warp, and I overcorrected, and I recorrected. If you're trying to get out a lot of warps, eventually you'll just feel the blade stiffen up, and then you know it's time to stop. I've never snapped a blade this way, but it's never too late to start. Okay, and here's our heat-treated blade. So next episode will be grinding. We're going to grind this into a finished knife. And between now and then, I'll throw it in the tempering oven at 375 degrees to take out some of the brittleness that was put into the steel by the hardening process. Here we have the knife all forged and hardened, so keep your eyes open for the next episode where we will grind this into a functional cutting tool.